Hello and welcome to Alan History Nerd. In this video I'm going to look at informal sources of presidential power and their use. This is going to be part one of two videos on this topic because there's quite a lot to cover, and just to try and keep the videos of a sensible length. This is part of my playlist on A-level politics, in which I'm trying to cover the entire specification. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do so and turn on notifications, and therefore you'll get a notification every time I add another video. So there's a lot there already, over 120 videos and more to come. So this is 3.2 informal sources of the presidential power and their use of component 3 of Edexcel A-level politics. And I'm going to look at the two bits highlighted in green: the electoral mandate, executive orders, national events and the cabinet, the power of persuasion, including the nature and characteristics of each president. I'm going to particularly focus on Obama and Trump for that. In this video I'm not going to do executive office of the president, including the role of National Security Council, Office of Management and Budget and the White House office, the significance of these powers with reference to presidents since 1992. I'm going to do that bit in red in the second part in a separate video. The electoral mandate is a really important part of the informal power of the president. An electoral mandate is a political leader being given the right to govern and act on behalf of the people by virtue of having won an election. This is strongest when a president has just won a convincing electoral victory, and weakest at the end of their term. At the beginning you get this particularly referred to as the 100-day effect in American politics, where actually a president probably does more in those first 100 days than they do at any other part of their presidency, because this is a moment where they can go to Congress and say, I want to do this, and look, the people elected me, so I've got popular support behind me. The end of their term they're often referred to as a lame duck, and during that period it is unlikely that they've got much mandate left, and Congress is likely to ignore them and not do what they want. So theoretically, at the point I'm making this video in early January 2021, then Trump has no real mandate left. He is a lame duck. He's just lost an election, and Biden will start on the 20th of January with a really strong mandate, having just won the popular vote by an absolute mile and a really convincing victory in the Electoral College. Things, however, are not going to be completely straightforward, because the mandate is going to be called into question by Trump and his supporters, who are refusing to accept the result and keep making lots of noise about electoral fraud and other kinds of nonsense which they've no support for. So the mandate is an interesting thing, and what we're seeing at the moment is really unusual, but what you would expect in American politics is you would expect someone in Trump's position to be getting absolutely nowhere, and what we would expect to see in early 2021 is Biden with a really strong mandate and getting quite a lot done. Whether that's exactly how it's going to play out is another matter. The power of the mandate also depends on the composition of the two houses. A president with control of both houses is in an incredibly strong position. We saw this with George W. Bush from his initial election all the way through to 2006. We saw it with Obama in 2008 to 2010, and Trump with it in 2016 to 2018. Though Trump made very little use of that really strong position. Again, we're waiting to see on Biden at the moment. We're a matter of days away from the runoffs in Georgia, and who wins those will largely then have an impact on the mandate that Biden has, because if they win both those seats, then they're going to have the narrowest of potential majorities in the Senate. They've got a majority in the House. If the Republicans take one or both of those senatorial positions in Georgia, then the Republicans will hold the Senate, and that will damage the mandate that Biden has. Executive orders are a really important part of American politics, and they're increasingly so. So they are legal orders that are made without a vote in Congress. So essentially it's the president making law by himself. It is part of an implied powers from the Constitution to the president, and they become increasingly important as presidents have struggled to get any bills through Congress. Traditionally, they are linked to an existing act of Congress that has either been too vague or isn't quite working as it's supposed to be, and the president will add an executive order to try and get things done as they were intended to happen. And in that kind of circumstances, they're fairly uncontroversial, and there's often lots of ways and circumstances which they can be uncontroversial. So, for example, Obama creating the White House Council on Native American Affairs, not a controversial issue. When he stopped the CIA using methods of torture to get information on terrorism, this wasn't hugely controversial because that's what Congress had wanted Bush to do before, and he refused to. Obama did it. Congress is happy. It's uncontroversial. It's an executive order being used essentially as intended. Executive orders, however, can be highly controversial. And a president has to be really careful not to step on Congress's toes. They can face legal challenges. They can create a great deal of hostility with Congress if they use too many executive orders or using executive orders that are kind of overstepping the mark in terms of presidential power. Trump is probably the best example of this. He used 32 executive orders in his first 100 days, which is almost as many as the 35 that Obama uses in his entire first term. One of the most controversial was his executive order on banning immigration from 7 largely Muslim countries, and this caused outrage in the media, in the population, huge protests, and it caused outrage amongst many in Congress. It was also challenged in the courts, which is one of the things that can go wrong with an executive order. And it was also wasn't supported by the Attorney General, Sally Yates, who Trump then dismissed. There have been countless conflicts like this over his executive orders, and this has then led to a hostile relationship, particularly with the Democrats in the House and Nancy Pelosi in particular. And because the Democrats controlled the House, or have done since 2018, they just block Trump's attempts to do anything really in terms of passing legislation, passing budgets. But we didn't only see it from the Democrats. Trump cried about it being the Democrats. We also saw it by Republicans, and part of that was because they didn't like the way that he was carrying out business, and this excessive use of executive orders is part of it. So they are used and have been used by Trump and Obama and Bush and Clinton and all previous presidents. What's changed really has been the frequency in which they've been used. And it's that fine line between essentially going round Congress and Congress going, yeah, okay, no, we accept that, that's fine, and going essentially a bit round Congress and Congress going, no, that's not how it should be, or the judiciary stepping in and going, no, you're going too far. National events are also really important in shaping the kind of informal power of the president. So a big national or international event such as a natural disaster or economic crisis or terrorist attacks or some kind of international conflict can play a role in determining the level of presidential power and the legacy of the president and the way the president is perceived. If they handle a national event well, then a president's power and prestige will increase. I mean, this was the case with George W. Bush following the 9/11 attack, where he was seen to be very much capture the mood of America and act as Americans wanted him to do. And this then fed into this kind of power and support that he had. He then ends up with the Republicans in control of both houses all the way through to 2006, which gave him this really unprecedented level of power of a modern day president. A national event might, rather than really giving the president a boost, it might just distract them. So for a good example of this is Obama. So his presidential priorities were kind of blown off course right from the beginning of his time in office because he had to deal with the credit crisis. So he was dealing with the collapsing banks and all the financial crisis of 2008, and he had to deal with that before he could get onto his priorities like healthcare and things like that, by which point some of the momentum is lost. So that can be an explanation in terms of the standing of Obama and him getting done what he wanted to do before he then came across the midterms and the changing position in terms of where the Democrats were in the two houses. If national events are handled really badly, then this can have a hugely damaging effect on a president's popularity. Again, a really good example of this is Trump, whose mishandling of the COVID crisis has arguably cost him re-election. A lot of the polls and things before we got into that suggested and statistics suggest that people get re-elected for second terms. But because he's done such a bad job on that, there was key demographic areas that turned against him. Some of the older demographic was traditionally voted Republican. A lot of the better educated suburbs turned against him, as well as other groups who traditionally don't like Republicans and vote against them. It also kind of got people politically involved, which is why one of the reasons why we had such a phenomenally high turnout. So we've got three examples there. Well, we've got Bush, who benefited hugely from his handling of a national event. We've got Obama, who was distracted by one, and we've got Trump, who messed one up, and it really came and cost him. And I think it's going to cost his legacy as a president very strongly. The cabinet is another really important part of the informal power of the president, because they have a huge amount of power and control over it. So it's made up of the vice president, the heads of the 15 executive departments, as well as other cabinet level staff such as the chief of staff and people in charge of other key agencies. The people in all these people in the cabinet are appointed by the president, who can also fire them. And this then means that they don't have a huge amount of independent power. Presidents build their cabinets during the period from election to inauguration, which is a bit you might have been watching Biden do, and trying to get the balancing act of pleasing the various bits of his party and those who have been loyal to him in the past and have helped him get into the presidency and things like that. And it's one of the reasons why we have this long drawn out period between election and inauguration, which we don't have in the UK, because in the UK we have essentially a two-party system and we have a shadow cabinet sat there ready to go, essentially. If you are appointed to the cabinet and you're a member of Congress, then you have to resign from Congress to keep that separation of powers. So the cabinet has no independent power, and if they clash with the president, they are generally out of a job. This has been particularly true with Trump, we've seen more dismissals and resignations under Trump than we have under any other president ever. It's included 2 chiefs of staff, 3 national security advisors, 4 secretaries of Homeland Security, 3 attorney generals, 3 secretaries of Labour, 4 secretaries of veterinary affairs, and the list goes on and on. It's been almost impossible to keep up with all the chopping and changing. Now, having said this, heads of executive departments can have a great deal of impact on policy. Now, they are generally trusted advisors of the president, and most presidents accept that they can't run the country all by themselves, so they needed trusted people around them. John Kerry, for example, as Secretary of State, played a key role in forming and carrying out foreign policy under Obama. The vice president can play a hugely important role. Probably the best example of this is Dick Cheney under George W. Bush, who we believe was kind of almost like a puppet master. He was behind many of the key policies that Bush brought in. There's a really interesting film made about it all called Vice that's well worth watching. Biden worked very closely with Obama, and he was doing things like drafting gun control legislation, so we believe he played an important role in that administration. However, there's no guarantee of having any political power as VP. You can be essentially just ignored, and essentially you're there as a backup in case anything happens to the president. I mean, there is doubt about how much influence Pence has had, if any, over Trump during his tenure in office. I think, again, this is one of the things over time, more stuff that will come out. But essentially, Pence was selected because he would bring a group of supporters to the ticket, the evangelical Christian vote to Trump's ticket. What he's done beyond that in his term, it can be called into question. The powers of persuasion, including the nature / characteristics of each president. Well, this is a really interesting one. So in terms of formal power, it's very difficult for a president to make anybody outside the executive do anything because of separation of powers. Therefore, whilst the UK Prime Minister can, through the powers that they got, can make the House of Commons do essentially what they want it to do, assuming they have a majority, the President doesn't have that kind of power. So they have to use persuasion. They have to get people to do what they want without being able to force them to do what they want. And they can use their prestige of office, and they can use a whole variety of different methods to get what they want. And each president has their own way. Now, I'm just going to look at Trump and Obama. Well, Trump had his own way, and it was highly, highly aggressive. He would often threaten and belittle anybody who disagreed with him. And he had this fanatical support base, and this was a group of Republican supporters that he seemed to be able to motivate and to bring out if the other Republicans just can't. And that means he could essentially threaten Republican members of Congress and state officials with challenges to their re-election and their position. And he could say essentially, if you're not with me, you're against me. If you're against me, then you're going to have contenders coming up against you in primaries, and you're not going to get re-elected, and etc. Attacks by Trump often would come from press conferences, but in particular would come via Twitter. Now, those who get attacked by Trump on Twitter then find from his base often face threats, and these might even include threats of physical violence. We've seen this for Republican administrators and office holders who have stood against him on the whole fixed election thing, and particularly we've seen this in places like Georgia, where the local elected Republicans have gone, no, the election was fair, we've done everything above board. We've seen it in Pennsylvania and other places as well. And some of these people have then actually not only seen threats from Trump about losing their position and power, but actually threats to their lives and their safety. Now, Trump's hold over the Republican Party has far outlasted what we would normally expect, particularly of a president who's lost after only one term, and lost so badly as Trump has. And part of this seems to be that there is still this kind of awe and fear of Trump amongst the Republican Party, that he essentially can make or break individuals within the party, and potentially even the party itself. And there are signs at the moment of the party potentially splitting in the pro and anti-Trump camp within there, with those who are willing to follow him come what may, and those who are going, actually enough is enough. Again, how that plays out will be really interesting. Powers of persuasion under Obama then. Well, Obama was a really different kettle of fish. So he had renowned skills as an orator, as a brilliant speech maker. He was far more conciliatory than Trump. He often sought compromise with his opponents, though he didn't always achieve it. And he would often leave Congress to devise legislation itself. Now, this is often a better approach when you're trying to get something to actually pass. But it has led to quite a lot of criticism of Obama and his method of doing things. So a lot of his critics wanted him to be said he should have been more assertive, that he let things drift, particularly on things like gun control and healthcare. He didn't put enough pressure on Congress. He didn't push enough stuff through himself. This criticism has particularly come from the progressive left of the Democrat Party, people like Bernie Sanders, and they just don't think Obama pushed hard enough on the things that they really care about. Now, the counter to that is Obama can be seen as being focused on what's referred to as the art of the possible. So rather than ideological perfection, that he was essentially trying to get through what he could get through, and this has possibly meant he got more done than for example, Clinton did when he was president. It's believed that Biden will go on and will be very much in the same vein, more of a compromise president, using his vast experience, not only as having been VP, but having been a member of Congress for so many years, to try and work out how to tick the right boxes and shake the right hands and make the right noises to the right people to get stuff through Congress. So we're probably going to see, well, definitely going to see an end to the bully boy tactics that we've seen under Trump. I hope that's been helpful for you. If it has, then please hit the like. If you've any comments that you want to leave, then please, or questions, then please leave those in the comment section. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and you'll get notified as more and more videos get added to this playlist on the channel and all the other ones as well. Thank you very much for watching.